We continue now at the top of Daf Yadalit of Beis Meseches Sotah. This is Sotah Daf 14b. The Gemara continues that Rabbi Eliezer holds mashke v'yachar kach makrives minchasa, that first she drinks the water and then she brings the karban mincha, and therefore the imishum Megillah. If the reason why we're trying to convince her to admit is because of the Megillah, we don't want to erase the name of Hashem. Ha'imcha kala. At this point in time, we've already erased the name of Hashem, and therefore the Gemara is saying it's clear that the reason Rabbi Eliezer wants her to admit is because the Torah has mercy on her. The Torah does not want her to be punished. Rashi says, Mashka hamayim v'yachar kach makriv minchasa. According to Rabbi Eliezer, again, first she drinks the water and then she brings the karban mincha. Uplug sahi v'perak hayanotel. And this is a machlokis later on. And Rashi points out, Umiyu nevertheless calls manjalo karban minchasa, as long as she hasn't actually brought the karban mincha, so ain't an nevdekes, so the water doesn't actually test her. In other words, she drinks the water, then brings the karban mincha. Only after that does the water test her. Dechsiv mazkeres avon. That's what the pasuk means when it says mazkeres avon. V'afal pisha shasa, even though she drank manichan osa biyada kedei liyaga. Again, we have her hold this karban mincha to tire her out. V'toda, that way she will admit. V'hashta vada mishum chisayinu. And now it is clear that the reason why we're trying to get her to admit is because we're having mercy on her. The imisham Megillah, because if it's because of the Megillah, we don't want to erase the name of Hashem. Ha'imcha kala. That's already been erased. And the Gemara continues, the Mishnah said, Kol ha-menachos v'chulu. The Mishnah was talking about the standard procedure by a regular karban mincha. And the Gemara says, Uraminu, we have the following contradiction. This is from a Tosefta. Seder menachos ketzad, how are karban minchas brought? It is as follows. Adam mevi mincha mitoch beiso bekalso shel kesef v'shel zav. A person brings the karban mincha from his house. He brings it in silver or golden vessels. V'nosna l'soch klishares. He puts it into a klishares. Umekadsha b'klishares. And he sanctifies it in the klishares. V'nosin olea shamno levonasa. He puts on top of it the oil and the frankincense. Umolicha etzel kohen. He brings this to the kohen. The kohen molicha etzel mizbeach. And the kohen brings it to the mizbeach. Umagisha bekeren jeromis maravis. And he brings it close to the southwest corner, connected chuda shel keren, by the corner of the mizbeach, v'dayu, and that is sufficient. U'misalik es halavon. At this point in time, he removes the frankincense letzad echad to one side. V'kometz mimakom shenisra b'shamna, and he takes the kmitza, he takes the fistful from the area where there's a lot of oil. V'nosno l'soch klishares, and he puts the kometz into klishares. U'mekacho b'klishares, and he sanctifies it in a klishares. U'melaked es lavonasa, he then collects the frankincense, v'nosna al gabav, and puts it on top of the kometz. Umaleyu maktiru b'klishares, and he brings it up and he burns it in the klishares. Umoch, and he puts salt on it. V'nosno al gabei isham, and he puts it on the fire. Karev hakometz, once the kometz is brought, shireha ne'achol, and the rest of the karban mincha is eaten. V'rashoyin hakohanim litein l'socha yayin v'shemen u'dvash, and the kohanim are allowed to put inside of it, meaning the remainder, they put in their wine and oil and honey. Ve'ein asurin ela milachametz, and the only prohibition is they're not allowed to let it become chametz. And the Gemara says, Katani Mia, nevertheless, what does it say in this Bryce? It says, Bekalsa shel kesef, Bekalsa shel zav. It says that they would put the karban mincha originally in these silver and golden baskets. They wouldn't put them right away in klisharis. They only put them in klisharis when they got to the Azara. And so the Gemara says, Amar Rapapa says, Ema rather say as follows. What the Mishnah means to say is, Bekalim haru'uyin l'klisharis. It means that it's put originally in kalim that are fit to be klisharis. It's not put in an actual klisharis, but it has to be nice vessels that in theory could be klisharis. And the Gemara says, Mechlal, but that implies the chfifa mitzris, that when it comes to an Egyptian wicker basket, lo chazia, that's not even fit to be klisharis. Keman de lo Rabbi Yossi Rabbi Yehuda. Who does that follow? It does not seem to follow the opinion of Rabbi Yossi Rabbi Yehuda. The Tanya, as we learned in a brisa, klisharis shason shalates. Let's say you have klisharis made out of wood, Rabbi posel. Rabbi Yossi Rabbi Yehuda machshir. Rabbi says it's posel, and Rabbi Yossi Rabbi Yehuda says it's kosher. And the Gemara says, afilu temer Rabbi Yossi Rabbi Yehuda. You could even say that we are following Rabbi Yossi Rabbi Yehuda here. Amor damer Rabbi Yossi Rabbi Yehuda b'chashuvin. Rabbi Yossi Rabbi Yehuda said you could use a wooden vessel to be a klisharis. That's only if it's a chashuv wooden vessel, if it's a nice vessel. But if it's something that's of low quality, would he say that that's okay? Less later, Rabbi Yossi Rabbi Yehuda hakrivein olafechasecha. Do you think Rabbi Yossi Rabbi Yehuda doesn't hold of the idea that it has to be fit to bring to your governor, and therefore even Rabbi Yossi Rabbi Yehuda agrees that it has to be a vessel that is considered chashuv? And the Gemara continues at the two dots. The Gemara is now analyzing the above Tosefta about how the karban mincha works. The Tosefta said, "V'nosna li klishares u'mekadja b'klishares." It says you put the mincha in a klishares and you sanctify it in the klishares. And the Gemara says, Shamat mina, do we see from here, Klishares and Mekadesh and Alamidas, that Klishares are only Mekadesh, they're only going to sanctify if you have intention. Because that's the language of, you put it into Klishares, and then you're Mekadesh b'Klishares. It sounds like you have to have intention. And the Gemara says not necessarily. Ema, instead you can read the Tosefta as follows: Nosna b'klishares. He puts it into a klishares likacha b'klishares in order to sanctify it into the klishares, but not necessarily. It doesn't necessarily prove that you need to have das. And the Gemara continues with the two dots we said above. Inosin oleh shamnu levonasa. You put on top of it the oil and the frankincense. And the Gemara says shenamar, like it says in the pasuk, vayitzok oleh shemen v'nasan oleh levona. The pasuk says explicitly, you put on the oil and the levona, the frankincense. And the Gemara continues at the two dots. Molicha eitzel kohen. You bring it to the kohen. That's also pasuk d'chsiv, like it's written ve'heviel b'nei Aaron v'gomer. They bring it to the children of Aaron. And the Gemara continues at the two dots. V'kohen molicha eitzel mizbeach, and the kohen brings it to the mizbeach. D'chsiv, as it is written, v'higisha l'mizbeach, and he brings it close to the mizbeach. And the Gemara continues at the two dots. Magisha b'karen dromis ma'aravis keneged chuda shel karen v'dayo. You put it by the southwestern corner of the mizbeach. And the Gemara says minolan. From where do we know that it goes to the southwestern corner? T'chsiv, because the pasuk, it's written in the pasuk, v'zos toras hamincha akri v'osa b'nei Aaron lifnei Hashem el pnei hamizbeach. It says in front of Hashem, at the face of the mizbeach. Betanyan, we learned in a brayso lifnei Hashem, so it says lifnei Hashem. What would lifnei Hashem mean? So yochel b'mayriv, I might think that might mean the west side of the mizbeach, because on the west side of the mizbeach, that's right in front of the Beis Hamikdash. That's lifnei Hashem. Talmud lomer el pnei hamizbeach. The pasuk says it's at the front of the mizbeach. The front of the mizbeach really is the area where the ramp is, and so the Gemara says el pnei hamizbeach yochel b'darm. If it only said the pnei hamizbeach, so I might think that's the south. That's where the ramp is to the mizbeach. Talmud lomer lifnei Hashem. So the pasuk says lifnei Hashem. It has to fulfill both lifnei Hashem and el pnei hamizbeach. Hakeitzad, how so? Magisha b'karen dromis ma'aravis. He brings it to the southwestern corner. Keneged chuda shel karen, by the sharp point, by the sharp part of the corner. V'dayo, and that is enough. Rabbi Elazar says, Yochel Yagishena b'ma'arava shel karen. I might think he puts it by the west of that corner. O l'droma shel karen, or maybe he puts it by the south of that corner. Amr, we say as follows: Kol makom she'atzamotzi shnei mikros. Anytime you have a situation of two psukim, echon mekayim atzmo, mekayim divrei chavero. One way you can fulfill that pasuk, and you can fulfill the other pasuk. V'echon mekayim atzmo mevatel divrei chavero. But the other way, you're mekayim the pasuk, one side of the pasuk, but you're mevatel, you would nullify the other one. So manichin esher mekayim atzmo mevatel chavero. We leave aside the choice where we're going to fulfill one part of the pasuk but mevatel the other, and rather v'tovs, and rather we take esher mekayim atzmo mekayim chavero. We take the option where we're mekayim both. Kishata Omer Lifnei Hashem b'mayrav. So therefore, the Gemara now explains, Rabbi Elazar explains, if you're going to say Lifnei Hashem and you're going to do it in the west, so then bital tel Pnei HaMizbeach, then you've totally nullified Pnei HaMizbeach. It's not at the Pnei HaMizbeach at all. Bidorim, because that should be at the south. Ucheshata Omer El Pnei HaMizbeach Bidorim. But if you do it, let's say Pnei HaMizbeach, you do it in the south, Kiyamta Lifnei Hashem b'mayrav. You still could fulfill that it's still Lifnei Hashem, it's still in the west. Hakeitzad, how so? Magisha l'deroma shel karen. You bring it to the south of that corner. And the Gemara says, V'heichon kayamt, and how have you fulfilled it? Ravashi says that Rabbi Elazar holds, Rabbi Elazar holds, Kasavar Haitana, this Tana holds, Kule Mizbeach B'tzafon Kai, that the Mizbeach really is already in the north of the Azara. In other words, the point is, if the Mizbeach is pushed towards the north of the Azara, so then if you're on the south side of the Mizbeach, you're also right in front of the Beis HaMikdash itself. So that's what the Gemara means to say. That's what Rabbi Elazar means to say. You can fulfill both. You can be on the south side of the Mizbeach, and at the same time, you're still Lifnei Hashem. And Rashi explains, Kasavar Haitana Rabbi Elazar holds, Kule Mizbeach B'tzafon Koi. The Mizbeach is in the north, B'chelak Tzfoni Shel Azara, meaning it's in the northern part of the Azara, of the courtyard of the Beis HaMikdash. V'leslei the Mizbeach Mechuvan Keneged HaHechel Uksalav. And according to Rabbi Elazar, he does not hold that the Mizbeach is exactly opposite the entrance of the Beis HaMikdash. Nimsa Duromo Shel Mizbeach, so it comes out, according to Rabbi Elazar, the south side of the Mizbeach, Keneged Emtza Pesach HaHechel. It actually corresponds to the middle of the doorway of the Beis HaMikdash. Hilkach Yagishen Al Pnei HaMizbeach B'Darm. Therefore, you can actually take it to the south side of the Mizbeach. Uvilvad Shei Samach L'Marav, as long as you're on the south side, but more towards the west. Nimsa Mekayim Es Shneim. So it comes out, according to that he's fulfilled both. And the Gemara continues, My Vidaya, what does the Tosefta mean when it says you bring it to this corner of the Mizbeach and that is sufficient? What more would you have thought that you're supposed to do? Amar Ravashi says, Itzrich, we do need it. Because you might have thought, Tiboy Hagashas Mincha Gufa. The Mincha itself needs to be brought there. Rashi will explain. Kamash Malon, so that's what it's teaching us. This is sufficient to bring it in this fashion. And the Gemara says, maybe we should say indeed that is the case. Maybe the mincha itself needs to be brought there. Amar Kravi, Kriva el HaKohen, V'higisha el HaMizbeach. It says, V'hikriva, you bring it to the Kohen, and then V'higisha, you bring it close to the Mizbeach. And we compare the two. Ma HaKrava, Eitzel Kohen Bekli, just like the HaKrava, you bring it to the Kohen in the Kli, in the vessel. Af Hagasha, Eitzel Mizbeach Bekli. So to Hagasha, when you're bringing it by the Mizbeach, you bring it in the vessel. Rashi explains, "My vidayu, my tesek adaite diniboy tfei." What more would you have thought is required? And the Gemara's answer was mincha gufe. What you would have thought is that the mincha itself, velo hakli shiba, not just the kli that it's in, ela yochav hakli. You would have thought maybe you have to tilt the kli. Sheheino geya solas lemizbeach. Maybe you would think that the flour of the korban mincha actually has to touch the mizbeach, and so that's what we're teaching you. That is not required. And the Gemara continues at the two dots. The Tosefta said when you take the kometz u'misalik es levonta litzad echad, you have to move the frankincense to one side. And the Gemara explains why. That's in order that when you take the fistful, the kmitza, you don't take any levona in the fist. Kedetanan, as we learned in the Mishnah, kamatz v'yola biyado tzror gargar melech or kort levona. Let's say the person takes a kmitza and then it comes up, he has either a pebble in there, or he has some salt, or he has a little bit of frankincense. Puzzle, that's actually puzzle, it's disqualified. That's why you have to set aside the levona. And the Gemara continues, v'kometz mimakom shenisra b'shamna, it's said above again, you take the kmitza from the area where there's a lot of oil. Minolan, from where do we know that? Because it's written, misolta mishamna, migorshu mishamna, keeps saying mishamna, from the oil. The idea is you take it from the area where there is a lot of oil. And the Gemara continues at the two dots, v'nosno l'soch klishares, u'mekadsho b'klishares. It then said you take the kometz and you put that into a klishares, and you sanctify it into a klishares. Lomali hakid shachadazimna. Why do you need to put it in a klishares again? Didn't you sanctify the whole thing already in a klishares? And the Gemara answers, midi dahave adam. It's similar to the blood. When it comes to the blood, even though it is sanctified, because when the knife hits the neck of the animal, that sanctifies it. But still, you're mekadesh it again in a klishares. So hachanami loshna. Here too, there's no difference. And the Gemara continues at the two dots, it then says that you take the levona and you put it on top. It's talking about the fact that you put it on top of the kometz. And how do we know that? Like it's written, it talks about the levona and the mincha. Rashi says, this pasuk is by the burning, when you're going to burn the maktir kometz levona ki adadi. That is makatir, he burns the fistful and the levona together. That's why he puts the levona on top. And the Gemara continues at the two dots. We said above him aleyu, and then he brings it up, and we will continue with this discussion in the next video on Daf Tesvav Amud Aleph.